and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So let's talk about impact. Research impact is the contribution of our work to the economy, society, environment or culture beyond the contribution of academic research alone. So the need for us to think about impact at all stages of research is becoming increasingly acknowledged and required, particularly with the extra pressures on research funding we all face and the need for governments to be accountable regarding how their investments benefit the community at large. So Kerry Chan exemplified this earlier, where she emphasised the need to engage with and make a pact with the community. Be flexible, communicate effectively, engage multiple stakeholders and identify barriers to uptake. Many elements which have been vital to our successful response to COVID-19, with the exception of aged care, of course, as highlighted by Lee Fay. There are, however, many ways we can create impact. These include influencing health, economy and society, influencing policy, practice and working with communities, commercialisation and advancing knowledge or influencing future research. So today, I'm very excited that we bring together a stellar multidisciplinary lineup of 5 key experts in the brain and mind sciences field to chat with us about their views and successful pathways to impact. So we are thrilled to have join us Professor Nadia Badawi from the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, Associate Professor Michael Bowen. Oh, if you could all wave, guys, are you on that camera when I say your name? Associate Professor Michael Bowen from the Brain and Mind Centre, Professor Fernando Calamante from Sydney Imaging Corps and Brain and Mind Centre, Associate Professor Sally Gainsbury from the Brain and Mind Centre, and Professor Leanne Tor from the Acquired Brain Injury Communications Laboratory. So the proceedings will begin with an introduction to each of the speakers in turn, followed by an opportunity for them to briefly outline the critical features that they consider in designing and implementing impactful research. I personally have a whole series of questions in store for them, but I'm counting on all of you to get your questions lined up. So our BMC team will unmute each of you if you'd like to speak. If you prefer just to pop your question in the chat, that's fine. But if you'd like to speak, then pop your hand up or use the little hand icon that you can use via Zoom. So first up, I'm delighted to introduce Associate Professor Michael Bowen. Besides being a very nice person, Michael is a group leader at the Brain and Mind Centre and Associate Professor in the School of Psychology and co-founder and Chief Scientific Officer of the University of Sydney spin-out company Canoxus Therapeutics. His research focuses on the discovery and development of novel therapeutics for substance use disorders and social disorders. Canoxus Therapeutics was founded to commercialise novel treatments that Michael and several colleagues co-invented at the university, particularly those for substance use disorders and other central nervous system conditions. The company's lead compound, KNX-100, is being developed for the treatment of opioid use disorder and will commence clinical trials next year. Despite opioid overdose killing more people in the USA each year than car accidents, breast cancer or firearms, there are currently no novel molecular entities in clinical trials for treating opioid use disorder. The commencement of the KNX-100 clinical program will thus mark a major breakthrough. Canoxus was founded off a $5.3 million financing round led by the university-backed venture fund Uniseed and a consortium of family offices and sophisticated investors. Last year, Canoxus was awarded a US $4.6 million grant from the NIH to take their lead compound through IND enabling studies and phase 1 clinical trials. It was the only grant under the $1 billion 2019 NIH initiative awarded outside of North America. Wow, it's pretty impressive, Michael. Canoxus have recently closed a $5 million Series A2 financing round to further support their development programs, including large-scale research projects that will be conducted here at the University of Sydney. So Michael, let's get your views. So perhaps you can start us off by letting us know what you consider to be key components in designing and implementing impactful research.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question. And for me, it's about looking at research from the perspective of impact and the perspective of commercialization right from the stage of conception. Often I find it helps to start from the end and work backwards. So ask yourself, what does the end product look like? who's going to use it, why are they going to use it, how many people out there need a product like this, and what are they going to pay for it? Because ultimately, when you're developing new drugs, you're going to need to make that commercial argument to get people to put millions and millions of dollars on the table to develop something that's not going to return on investment for many, many years, and there's a lot of risk involved. I use a sort of very simple system that I've kind of called the problem need solution framework when I'm thinking through problems, and I like to get my team to use this. And when I give talks on commercialization and research impact, I often talk about this problem need solution framework. It's very, very simple. When you're talking about the problem, you need to really be able to articulate it from a market perspective, not just a technical perspective. So when you're starting out the research, what is this problem? So can you articulate it in terms of the end user, not just in terms of, oh, I want to develop a new technical solution to something because it's academically interesting. Who are the people that are going to use it? Why is it a problem for them? Now, in terms of need, do people actually need a solution to this problem that you're trying to solve? It may be that there are already really, really good solutions. Like coming up with a hepatitis C vaccine now is, a very different proposition to what it was, a decade ago or 15 years ago. Or it could be that there aren't any good solutions, but it's not really that big of a problem. If you offered me a device for $100 that would mean I would never have a paper cut ever again in my life, I'm not going to buy it because it's just not that big of a problem for me. So it's about what are the existing solutions, and do people really need a solution to this problem? Now, the final part of the equation is the solution itself. And there you need to really be able to articulate why this proposed solution that you're going to go out and research and you think that could offer this big breakthrough is better than existing solutions, and why your approach is likely to succeed. And if you can articulate those three things right at the start of a research project, I think you're setting yourself up for having a better chance of success than if you just sort of go into it and then at the end go, well, how am I going to commercialize this? What are the potential applications? And you also force yourself to start realizing that not all problems and not all solutions are created equal. And obviously there are key ingredients to a successful research project in terms of impact. If you've got a large potential market or a small market where there's a really desperate need, where there'll be large uptake, that's great. If there's very little or nothing on the market, already, you're off to a good start, and you're also obviously better placed if there's very few solutions in the pipeline. Now, obviously, you want to be able to come along in that context and say, I've got an idea for a novel solution that could lead to a really big breakthrough. So I guess that's my view on it in a nutshell.
I was just trying to unmute myself. Thanks so much, Michael. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because as researchers, often we've kind of taught traditionally to think about bench to bedside, but really you're kind of suggesting we flip that around and really think about it from a marketing perspective. So aside from the many things us academics should do, be better managers, think about science, think about statistics, we really should be thinking about, I guess, the marketing or the solution kind of end of our profile as well. Okay, so we're going to come back to you. I'm sure that people have plenty of questions for you and your experience with industry. So we're going to move on now to the fabulous Associate Professor Sally Gainsbury. Sally is the director of Australia's only university-affiliated gambling treatment and research clinic. Her research focuses on understanding gambling and the impact of technology on gambling and behavioural addictions. Her work informs the development of consumer protection strategies and harm minimisation policies, as well as the development of interventions to assist those experiencing problems. So Sally's research and contribution to the wider community has been recognised with many awards, including the New South Wales Tall Poppy Scientist of the Year Award in 2019, the UC Thompson Award, the Robinson Fellowship, the SOAR Fellowship, the Vice-Chancellor's Award for Research Excellence in Early Career Research, an ARC DECRA Award, the Southern Cross University Vice-Chancellor's Award, and the Australian Psychological Society Early Career Award. Wow, we're very lucky to have you, Sally, as part of the Brain and Mind Centre, award-winning. So Sally has been also awarded many research grants and fellowships totaling over $5.6 million, which includes studies working with industry, government and community stakeholders to design and evaluate responsible gambling strategies, to further understand internet gambling and social gaming, and to review internet-based treatment options. Sally's been invited to give many keynote presentations to a broad range of stakeholders internationally, including regulators, policymakers, industry, community and health professionals and academics, and published over 110 peer review articles, 2 books, and has been featured in more than 400 media stories. Wowee, Sally, okay, tell us your thoughts on designing and implementing impactful research.
Thanks, Sharon. I agree with Michael that I very much focus on the consumer. So my research is about reducing gambling harms in the community. So to do that, I have to work out, where are the harms, where are the most critical aspects. So there certainly is a theoretical and conceptual point of view where you have to work out, where is the potential to make the biggest difference. So I also work really in collaboration with government and with industry, because I recognise that it's not only the individual that has to change their behaviour, it's the whole design structure of how can we design safer environments, how can there be government regulation. Often actually industry will go beyond government regulation. There does seem to be a bit of to and fro, and industry can be a bit more innovative, and then the government will come in and regulate where there is a gap and a need. So there are different approaches, and breaking down the industry into different players is quite important. But the real key, I think, is the fact that we are at a nexus of treatment and research. So everything we do, we can run through both filters. When we have research projects that we're designing, we make sure we run them past our clinical colleagues to make sure that they have a practical application. And then vice versa, when we're designing new treatment interventions, we can make sure that they're informed by the most recent research, because gambling is rapidly changing. We have new online developments, online gaming coming out with gambling features in it. So it's, as it rapidly changes, we have to keep checking back in. And so I think that's the process for me of maximum impact, is a repeated sense check with what we're seeing through the clinics, as well as the research looking at, well, what are we actually seeing that the clinics won't see maybe for another 3 years, because there is a lag between how the problems develop and how long it takes someone to seek help. So we need to make sure we're repeatedly checking back in. Then we look at, where is the government at? Do we need to drive them in a specific direction? Do they need research to support an agenda? And where can we use our weight to show impact by strongly encouraging the industry to lift their game, to fund research and provide us data. So we've been quite successful in getting huge data sets from online operators we can then use to drive the impact. So I really look at it as a multi-stakeholder approach with all the players, consumers, government, industry, and regulators all together.
There's a bit of a lag in the unmuting function, so sorry for the uncomfortable silence there. That's wonderful, Sally. I think it's really important how you talked about that iterative process as well, coming back again and kind of reevaluating a problem. But also, I really liked your sentence about influencing government, being forward thinking and thinking in advance. What can we do in order to kind of shape the landscape, given the knowledge that we have? That's actually really good use of the knowledge we have in order to think about how do we get in there and kind of infiltrate and influence. So that's fabulous. So again, I'm sure the audience have got lots of questions for you as well, but we're going to move on now to Fernando. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Fernando Calamante, who studied physics in Argentina and obtained his PhD in MRI from University College London. He joined the University of Sydney in 2018 and is currently the Director of the Sydney Imaging Core Research Facility and Professor at the School of Biomedical Engineering. His main areas of research are in the development of novel methods for diffusion MRI, perfusion MRI and brain connectivity, and their applications to neurology and neuroscience. Fernando's gained international recognition for his work and his MRI methods, which have been adopted by many labs, including ours. Fernando's been very helpful with our students. For example, his MR-Trix software for diffusion MR analysis is widely used worldwide and is one of the most popular tools in the field. His research funding totals over $44 million, including multiple ARC and NHMRC project grants and fellowships, 2 NHMRC program grants, MRFF funding and the industry funding. And Fernando has been elected to several leadership positions within the International Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine, including in 2021 to 22 as president. Wow, congratulations, Fernando. So perhaps I can hand over to you now to give us your thoughts on designing and implementing impactful research. Thank you.
Good. I was starting to get worried because I couldn't unmute myself, but I can see that yes, until they do it, I can't. All right. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, so it's, as you said, I come from a very different background of probably the rest of the panel. So I come from a more physics engineer, technical background. But it's interesting that many of the things that Michael and some of the things that Sally said, they do apply to the how impact plays a role in the research that we do. So from my side, what I do is develop methods, in my case, imaging methods. And it's key that they had to be designed to address a specific aim and a specific need. So from that point of view, you can see a lot of analogies, for example, how Michael started saying. And this is maybe where it is very different how people working on my type of research or field, they do. You can go for, I want to develop a method, and then once you have the method, start shopping around and going around. It's almost like inventing the hammer and where are the nails that I can hit. But it's very important. I was very lucky that through my whole career, I was embedded, even though I come from physics and engineer background, I was embedded in a very multidisciplinary place, like here at the Badawi Center. Before that, I was at the Florey in Melbourne. Before that, I was at the Institute of Child Health in London. So I always was, surrounded by clinicians, neuroscience, and that they helped me find which were the questions that I wanted to tackle, or when I was coming with ideas, try to, where they could fit to address a specific aim. So from that point of view, I really, really think that is key for impact is to have that possibility of multidisciplinary embedding. Otherwise, I think it is more one ends up doing is just developing hammers, new hammers, another tool, another tool, another tool, without really a specific aim in hand. The other one that it was mentioned in the panel before, it is, for me, it's the same, the link with industry is also very, very important. And is, it is, in my case, for example, I've had a lot of experience with Siemens, that is one of the manufacturers of MRI scanners. It has helped both develop the research, but also, the widespread impact of our research, because then it gets implemented by them, distributed by them and things. And not to mention, obviously, source of funding, which in the current environment becomes a very, very important source of alternative source of funding to NHMRC and ARC. And the other one that I would mention for impact is that, and this has changed over the years, now it's more and more common, and it's important that we release those tools that we develop. It used to be, I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago, when I started, is whatever you develop, it used to be just for your lab and only your lab could do it. And then if another lab wanted to do it, they had to reinvent the wheel again. Now really the field has moved, and it's key that we release these tools. And that's where the impact happens. And for example, Sharon, you mentioned before, the MR-Trix software that we release, has become one of the key tools in the field. It hasn't given us any, it's not that we could commercialize it and make money out of that, but it certainly has made an impact on the fellowships that I got, the grants that I got, and things like that. And we are known around the world because of that. Or as I said, the collaboration with Siemens, releasing our softwares with the industry partners and things like that. So I think that is a key role to do. And the last one that I would mention is more, if you want, something that it took me a while to work out. And it's more in case there are people in the audience doing similar work to me. I used to be very critical of the work that I did. And until, what is the expression? Don't make the perfect be the enemy of the good. So now it used to be that the method has to be perfect before I can release it. Otherwise, I didn't like it. And you know, it takes a bit of time to realize that actually the field can hugely advance and make a huge impact with a method that is not necessarily perfect, but it still is a massive improvement to what is there around. So that I learned over time, that is to become less critical of the work that I do, while still being critical to aim for great work, but not, it doesn't need to be perfect. Perfect is very hard to achieve. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Fernando. I think that's a really interesting insight. Also, the multidisciplinarity that you mentioned, do you see that that's kind of vital in generating the solutions, as well as really kind of working out what the problem is, but actually having many different disciplines come together to work out the solution is, I think, probably critical in being an MDI initiative as well. But I also think that your point about releasing tools, you know, also goes for the release of data sets, etc. as well, that we realise that we can do much more with these great data sets that we all collect, that we probably don't publish enough on. And we need to let our neuroticism go sometimes as academics and get out there so we can have dialogue with people about what isn't helpful. Thanks very much. So again, we'll come back with more questions for you, no doubt. So next up, we're extremely privileged to have on our panel Professor Nadia Badawi, AM, Medical Director and Co-Head of the Gray Centre for Newborn Intensive Care at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, and the Chair of Cerebral Palsy Research at BMC. So Nadia is focused on collaborating with families, health professionals, researchers, scientists, policymakers and philanthropists to prevent disability among babies who have been in neonatal intensive care, as well as advocating for and improving the quality of life for those who live with cerebral palsy and their families. Nadia and her colleagues work on identifying causes of cerebral palsy, prevention, evidence-based treatments, cures, advocacy and fundraising. Working for a not-for-profit organisation, she is guided by people with cerebral palsy and their families who frequently remind her to stay focused on work that is meaningful to them. These collaborative efforts have culminated in a recent 30% drop in the rate of cerebral palsy in Australia, which is very impressive, as well as a decrease in severity. So Nadia, it's a great pleasure to have you join us today. Please share your views on what are the key ingredients in designing and implementing impactful research.
Well, I think that Sally and Michael and Fernando have already touched on a lot of it. But I think because I work in newborn intensive care, the results of the work that we do are immediately available. We can't hide, and that's our research has been focused on increasing survival and decreasing disability. We're an extremely strong conductor and adopter group of health professionals and scientists. And you know what we have, and I think that's really important for all of us to think about, we have population-based registers. So babies in newborn intensive care unit in Australia and also those with cerebral palsy are on population-based data sets. So we can see the impact of what we do very immediately. The interventions that increase disability, but also may decrease disability. And I think we have been thrilled that not just with the drop in the rate of cerebral palsy, which we could measure because of the registers, but also in the decrease in severity. And so Australia now has the lowest rate of cerebral palsy in the world. That's published, and we're excited about that. And I think that's been an ingredient for success. We don't use big, complicated words. We announce our results. Everybody gets what it means to have a lower rate of disability among babies in newborn intensive care. The other thing that my colleagues Sarah McIntyre and Iona Novak did early on was they actually surveyed families, people with CP and researchers and said, what matters to you guys? And we built up a research institute, which is now at the BMC, which worked. We worked 25 people who also work with people in Australia and around the world in all the areas that have been highlighted as important to us. And I think we now see that cerebral palsy, which used to be, honestly, it used to get $1 million of funding from the National Health and Medical Research Council in a good year, because it was considered hopeless. Why would you ruin your career doing research in that area? To now, it's just gone straight up, because we track the research funding, both from the National Health and Medical Research Council and our own grants program. And I think that, what has been incredible has been the increase in the research that's coming out around the world, not just in its numbers, but also in its quality. We've also tracked, so some of our small grants we've given to young researchers, and we've watched their careers go. They're now, 80% of them are now major researchers in their own right, because I think that was commented earlier on, that it's easy for people who've got the title professor to get funding. But
I think we've lost Nadia, so we might actually come back to Nadia and move on to Leanne. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So look, I think that we have invested in young researchers. I think that's critical, because I look at myself, I'm sort of towards the middle to end of my career, and I want to find that young, bright scientist who hasn't got publications, hasn't got citations, and if their work excites me and my colleagues, they're the future. We give them a bit of money and watch them go. We also about collaboration. I think working with lots of other groups, as Fernando has commented on, engineers, also, you know, you learn a lot about research from people who understand. Like a mother who has a child with a disability has a lot to teach us. So I'll leave it for there and join in the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, really, I think that's really helpful, Nadia, and the support of the ECRs and inspiration, providing inspiration for those ECRs and keeping them grounded towards the end goal, I think is really important in that bigger picture, isn't it? And our last speaker certainly has lots of experience doing that as well, and I think a great mentor to many of us female researchers across the university. So it's my great pleasure to now introduce Professor Leanne Tor, Professor in Speech Pathology, specialising in acquired brain injury. So she's the current recipient of her 3rd consecutive NHMRC Fellowship in the Faculty of Medicine Health. She's a Principal Research Fellow of the University of Sydney and a member of the BMC's Executive Leadership Committee. Her internationally renowned work in brain injury rehab spans over 30 years, and she leads the development of a number of digital health and technology initiatives in this field, which established novel ways in which treatment can be provided to people with acquired brain injury and their families. So in 2018, Leanne was awarded the NHMRC Elizabeth Blackburn Fellowship Award for being the highest ranked female research fellow applicant in the NHMRC Fellowship Scheme in the field of clinical medicine and science, and she's had continuous funding since then. And her recent work includes being a CI on 3 NHMRC CREs. Wow, so that's really solidifying your commitment to ECR and capacity building there, Leanne. And she also has a current CRE in aphasia rehabilitation program. So her current funding from iCare New South Wales is building the infrastructure to offer specialist psychiatry services to people with TBI, with the next stage including building statewide telepsychiatry services. She's also the leader of the Acquired Brain Injury Communications Lab, which comprises postdoc fellows, honours, masters and PhD students, and has authored over 300 papers, including international clinical practice guidelines. It's a good marker of impact, which have impelled changes to Australian, American and Canadian brain injury guidelines. And she's a fellow of the Speech Pathology Australia, a director of the International Brain Injury Association, and an appointed member of the WHO Development Group for TBI, one of 2 speech pathologists internationally. So Leanne, wow, you're doing a lot. Please give us your thoughts on designing and implementing impactful research.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be on this extraordinary panel with such esteemed colleagues. And I feel like I can only echo what many have said about impact. But when I think about it, it's really what is the impact of what we can do for the person with brain injury. That's for me what impact is. I know there are many other ways of measuring impact, but for me to be able to do that, it's really key that I understand as much as I can what their experience of recovery is after a brain injury, and also understanding their trajectory of recovery, and identifying the factors that we might be able to influence along that journey with them, and finding out what they want. So finding out what people with brain injury want, what do families want. So it's very similar to what Nadia was saying. And what do clinicians want? What are they able to do in the current funding models for models of care that they can deliver in, you know, public and private spheres? So it's really being clear about all those factors and then working out, well, how can we give them what they want? So that for me is addressing impact. And so from my point of view, working with people with acquired brain injury, we've done quite a lot of work to look at those factors and you know, working out that, for example, recovery is a long, slow process, and people can recover and look like they're going quite well by 2 years, but then we can see a decline after that time. And so it's, well, what can we do after that 2-year time point to prevent decline and to help people, you know, work, study, build friendships, and have meaningful engagement with society. So it's really identifying the issues that we can impact, and then creating treatments that we can engage people in. And so digital health and technology has really, it's been particularly an issue this past year with COVID-19, and being able to deliver treatments when they, you know, Lee Faylow mentioned earlier about services ceasing because of COVID-19. And so that made it even more clear that we need to be up and running online to provide services for these people and give them the capacity, which is something they've told us is they'd like to be engaged in self-directed work, that they want to be able to do treatment over many years. So really creating the resources for them to be able to do that, and also for families, and working in with what clinicians can deliver. So that for me is what impact is all about.
That's fantastic, Leanne. And look, I might just, while we're waiting for everyone else to think about their questions, put your hand up, I'll pop them in the chat. I might just follow up. So, I mean, the NHMRC and other funding bodies are increasingly recognising and emphasising, you know, the need to work with consumers in this space. Do you think there are kind of key strategies or things that we should all really bear in mind when working with consumers? Like, what are the kind of key things we need to do to maximise the time we spend with them?
So for me, there are 4 main areas. One is talking to consumers before you even write the grant.
Yeah.
And so I've been working with iCare New South Wales over the past few years, and that's a wonderful part of their process, is that you meet with consumers. And for me, consumers are people with brain injury and their families, but also clinicians. And funding bodies, and iCare are a consumer as well, because they're a funding agency, they're an insurer, and working out what is important to them. And so the issue of, for example, being able to provide services after 2 years post-injury came up in one of our co-design workshops that we had. So we then built that into the grant as that's when we're going to start working with individuals when we, you know, if we get the money. Having advisory groups, setting that up early on and consulting with them regularly, providing them ongoing results of your studies and getting their feedback. We've found that to be a really important way to engage consumers. Piloting your processes and then getting people to give qualitative feedback about their experience of that, and then feeding that forward into your next iteration of whatever it is you're doing. So really that's core to developing what you're doing. And we've also been using this thing called the FATE template, the framework for, I knew I'd forget the, it's a way of measuring impacts of centres of research excellence, so programs of work, and it's framework to assess the impact from translational health research. So it's really like doing case studies, having narratives, and feeding forward into the program of research as you go. So having a number of speakers today have talked about that reiteration of this process, and that's key to that. So there's many ways you can engage consumers along the course of your research, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. We're certainly all guilty of leaving our grants to the last minute and then realising we haven't engaged consumers in that process.
Yeah.
Not all of us, some of us are guilty.
Yeah, no, I've been guilty of that, don't worry.
Look, we've only got a few minutes, so I just want to have a quick, just a really quick wrap up, 30 seconds, a minute. Fernando, from you, I mean, you're in a really technical field. What do you think is the key thing for people in the kind of technology field, particularly the ECRs, to really think about when you get kind of engrossed in your own project? How do you kind of get outside of that in the early career stage and think about that solution focus?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it is hard in the sense that now the new grant system is not helping. But I think it is key to, again, the multidisciplinary thing, not to get yourself too narrow and too focus on your own little problem, but try to go for the big picture and where the field and the group or the center where you are is pointing. So you really try to, as much as possible, take the bird's eye view of things and then come back to the little things. And, you know, that going, zooming in, zooming out, zooming in, really helps direct what the research direction you want to build and really where the impact you want to do should be.
Yeah, okay, great tips. And Sally, you're juggling a million things, being an ECR, a new research team, and also motherhood. So any quick tips for people in your position? How do you kind of devote your time to these, you know, consuming things like, you know, consumers and health and policy and government and all of that kind of stuff? How do you kind of prioritize that? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it does differ. So my advice for early career researchers is just to say yes to everything to the extent that you can. So, you know, I used to stuff conference satchels and go to every meeting and every conference and meet people and have conversations, and I still think that's really important. I personally now do have to be quite strategic with my time. And so I do try and leave at least one day a week to have just work get done and try not to have meetings on that day. That doesn't always work. But to feel free to push back when you get requests would be my suggestion, that to say, yes, I will give that talk, but it's going to be on this topic rather than the systematic review you've asked me to do in the next week. Or, you know, yes, I think that's a great topic, but how about I hold a webinar and then I can train a whole bunch of people rather than just do, you know, a service by service provision. So, or even better, I've got a PhD student who will be great for that. So I'm trying to be better at delegating, about thinking, how can I actually scale something and make it a broader opportunity, and also to be really strategic. You know, who's going to be there? Is this the right opportunity? Am I the right person for that? Or should I refer you to a colleague? So unfortunately, that does mean passing on some things, but I do think it is really important to invest the time to understand the stakeholders' viewpoint. So I still do try and attend industry conferences, government conferences, stakeholder community conferences, because often I find that really helps to shortcut when you can speak the language of the people that you're trying to impact. It's going to be a better outcome than just trying to force research jargon necessarily at people. So there aren't always shortcuts. I think it's about really being strategic and focused. What is the impact you're trying to achieve, and potentially doing that one piece at a time where is relevant towards your goals.
Great. And just quickly, Michael, also Harrison, I can't actually see any chat here. I don't know if it's the feature of our panel, but if people do have questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat then, and our panelists will try to answer them while we wrap up, or feel free to interrupt me if someone's got a question they'd like to ask in person. But Michael, just quickly, industry, like really difficult, kind of very different, getting outside of the sphere. What are your kind of tips for success in dealing with industry? How do we build those relationships effectively for impactful research?
Yeah, look, I think with working with industry, it's incremental. Start off with something small, show them that you can deliver on time, you can deliver on budget, your results are reliable, that you're a good partner, that you're providing those insights, and then build up. You know, don't go straight in with a new partner with $1 million project. Find something small, something tangible that's low risk for them, but that will give them an insight into how you work. Yeah. In terms of sort of commercializing your own research, I think there it's really important to realize that identifying that you may be able to commercialize your research isn't the end of the journey. It's actually just the very start. You've taken some important steps, but you're a few kilometers into a marathon. And really, you've got to put in the effort and become invested in taking those next steps, because you know your research better than anyone else. And being involved is going to be critical for taking those next steps and maximizing the chances of success. Now, that can be really, really daunting. So what I'd suggest you do is go out there and seek advice from people who have been successful in similar areas. I took up every single offer for an introduction. I just plain cold called people that I knew had been successful. It's amazing what people will agree to if you offer them a free lunch or a dinner. And just put yourself out there and go out there. That advice that I received from these people who are incredibly generous with their time, like incredibly successful people, so generous with their time and advice, it was absolutely invaluable. Yeah. And then I guess as a sort of overall thing, I'd say probably start trying to change the way you think about your research a little bit. There's this understandable habit in academia of either implicitly or explicitly viewing publications and citations as the end goal for research, which I think is really fundamentally flawed. They are an important part of the process, absolutely, but they shouldn't be the driver of research. So start trying to think about research impact first, publications, citations second.
Yeah, yeah. And Nadia, I think your point, just as a final note, absolute final note, and I'll hand over to Matthew, is you talked about immediacy, and I think that was really important. I mean, research is really typically slow, but you talked about that as kind of immediate kind of results and things informing clinical practice, etc. We often struggle with that in the research environment. Do you have any tips for us there?
I would say that every scientist or researcher needs to be able to explain their research. You know, I watched a young scientist I work with explain to the grandmother of one of my patients why some weird molecule he was working on would make a difference to a child like hers. She donated 500,000. But it is worth getting that. Find a mentor who is supportive and will put you on their grants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Collaborate with the community. People are interested in the work you do if you can make it understandable to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So start talking using colloquial language instead of our scientific. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much to all our excellent panelists. I could have kept chatting with you all for a very, very long time. I hope our audience have found it helpful for their research, particularly our ECRs and people thinking about embarking upon work in this field. So thank you so much. If we can do claps on the screen, I'll do it for everybody else, perhaps. And like to emphasise there really also the importance of really thinking beyond the scope of the traditional research metrics and the value of the multidisciplinary initiatives really, and thinking about the breadth of work we can do to really make a contribution. So I'd like to hand over to our co-director Matthew Kiernan to wrap up the proceedings for today and any final comments he has to make on pathways to impact, and thank the panelists once again.
Well, just thanks, Sharon, for really bringing a great discussion out from all the panelists. I'd like to thank Sally, Nadia, Leanne, Michael and Fernando for really giving their personal insights, which were very instructive and thought-provoking, wide-ranging discussions.